Very much welcome again to our seminar series, Grappling with Complexity. This is the 17th presentation actually in the series. So I should just mention that all the previous presentations are on YouTube, and this one will be recorded and put up on YouTube too, in case you miss any. We had a very diverse mix of presentations so far, but today we'll be engaging with Dr. Glenn Holtzman from Nelson Mandela University's Department of Music, Performing Arts. Glenn received a doctorate in musicology from Penn University in the US. And he is very active now, not only as a pianist and composer, but across disciplines, including critical race theory, sexuality theory. So we're looking forward, of course, we can always rely on Glenn to come up with something creative and novel and interesting. And today he'll be talking about music and its kind of complex connection with sensory stimulation. And I'm looking forward to a very interesting presentation. So over to you, Glenn.
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you to the guests who've joined us today. It's a very complex topic, and given that the nature of the seminar series is about complexity, I thought it was quite fitting to speak about something which I'm really fascinated about, and which there's not a lot of research data about really, called the musical orgasm. But before I get going with my topic, I'd just like to begin by giving a brief disclaimer that this talk involves a topic with a sexual nature. And I also want to mention that even though I use classical music examples in my talk to illustrate the concepts, they are by no means the only examples of the phenomenon I discuss, merely the genre with which I am most familiar. And you may also experience loud music coming through your speakers compared to the volume of my speaking microphone. So please adjust your own volume on your own side if the music does become a bit too loud for you. And there may also be just very brief moments of silence when I'm changing the media on the share screen. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and ask you to watch a little short extract of a video taken from a film called Farinelli il Castrato. And I often use this example in my teaching. Just need to get this much bigger and see what happens in this scene. You'll see the depiction, your first perhaps introduction to what some scholars are considering a musical orgasm. Let me just stop that because I don't think you're getting sound. So I want to try to correct that quickly. Just give me 1 second. And here's the aria from... Well, there in this film, you've seen in the depiction of an opera scene, somebody in the audience, a very noble woman, encountering an orgasmic moment as the result of being pierced by the sound from the performer on stage. And some musicologists might argue that perhaps the performer is also encountering a musical orgasm as he sings that long, piercing note. Now I need to go to my PowerPoint quickly. I don't seem to find the PowerPoint. Well, nevertheless, I'm going to continue talking. We are most familiar with the sexual orgasm, characterized by a sudden discharge of sexual tension. So what constitutes a human orgasm is up for debate. There are at least 26 definitions of orgasm listed in the journal Clinical Psychology Review. Increasingly, scholarly attention has shifted from the biological to the psychological and neurological interpretation of what types of sensorial stimulation and sensation should be classified as orgasms. The human orgasm is thus a complex construct and phenomenon, and our relationship to the experience is subjectively unique. No one person is able to exactly feel the orgasm of another. It is a mysterious experience, a secret experience, and for some, even a sacred experience. In 1966, William Masters and Virginia Johnson proposed a 4-stage linear model of human sexual response based on some 10,000 recordings of changes in participants' physiology. From these data, they identified 4 successive, hence linear stages, the first being excitement, the second, the plateau, the third, the moment of orgasm, and the 4th stage, the resolution. Similarly, in music theory, scholars and philosophers have also identified that the most effective pieces of music play with the concepts of tension and resolution. Known as the tension and release method of musical construction, scholars have referred to the build-up of musical intensity that eventually dissolves and relaxes, both sonically and physically. And for the listener, a moment of unrest in the music creates an expectation for its resolution and an anticipation for the drama to resolve. Tension and release keeps the music moving forward and may be achieved a number of ways: through texture, tone color, harmonic sonority, and rhythmical complexity. And in this slide, I've just given you a visual representation of how we, as musicologists or sound scientists, are able to visually see examples of musical tension. In an article by Gonzalo Noguera titled "Tension and Release, the Fundamental Way We Listen to Music," he explains that one of the advantages of working with music is that it is an art form that requires an interplay with time from beginning to end. He captures the complexity of creative composition and musical execution by examining what are for him and a great many scholars, including myself, the core types of musical tension that can be played with in relation to time. These are dynamic tension, that's the playing with the volume of the sound, the rhythmical tension, the textural tension, the melodic tension, and the harmonic tension. Now, in relation to dynamic tension, he states, quote, that dynamic tension is often used in conjunction with melodic and harmonic tension to create a climax where the music is the loudest, and all the harmonic tension is released, or the dynamic climax can also be the pinnacle of tension, and the release is then felt during what is known as a decrescendo. So dynamics refers to how loud or how soft music is, and in music we can use the terminology crescendo to mean getting louder gradually over time, and decrescendo to decrease your volume over time. But it can also be noted that sometimes you can have abrupt fluctuations instead of gradual ones. Now, the textual tension refers to the rich lushness of the music or the density of the sound. For example, having multiple melodies all sounding simultaneously or interplaying with one another. Now, generally, the thicker the texture, the louder it will sound, and the more opportunities there exist for blurring harmonies and playing with the harmonic overtone series. The rhythmical tension is the playing with beats in time, and it's often achieved via a compositional device called perpetual movement, where there's a constant, equal, and active rhythmical idea that goes on throughout the whole piece, and this serves to carry and keep tension high until the end of the movement. Another way of creating tension through rhythm is by creating complexity, such as different rhythms in different voices, and this is highly related to the textural tension. Introducing syncopation, which is the accenting of unexpected beats or parts of the beat, and using irregular meters or time frames and employing polyrhythms. Now, the melodic tension is created through the deliberate arrangement of a series of pitches or tones, pitches being the various qualities of the sound, how high or low they are. And the generally arising melodic line creates tension, and a falling melodic line releases it. Noguera states, quote, "This is why a lot of melodies can be represented by an arc. They start low, rise to a climax, and then descend again. And almost all Gregorian chant melodies on which almost all classical music tradition stands follows this pattern. And I would add that little has changed over the numerous centuries in various contexts and cultures, in fact. Harmonic tension, the last type, is governed by consonance and dissonance. Now, where there's more than one note sounding at the same time, they can be consonant or dissonant with each other. And consonance refers to whether it's pleasing to the ear, and dissonant, it's harsh, it's unpleasing. And this is not a matter of subjectivity, it's linked to the harmonic series, which is a fundamental law of physics. Consonant intervals sound pleasant and stable, and dissonant intervals may sound harsh and usually sound unstable. So more dissonance equals more tension. And so various infinite, although that concept is also debatable, various infinite options exist for creating music that plays with the concepts of tension and release. The complex coordination of the aesthetics to achieve a particular type of affect. The affect is how the music sort of emotionally pierces you or affects you. And even more so to the complexity of the musical creation. In other words, this has become known as the ability to paint with sound. Now, my fascination and my topic in this talk centers around the effect of arousal and climax, or what I'm referring to as musical orgasms, which are captured in song. And these sorts of graphs allows me to be able to identify or plot them if I'm analyzing a piece of music, to sort of see how the orgasm has been constructed in relation to the broader whole by the composer. Now, this has also opened up the questions of the concept of the post-orgasm, or the refractory period of sexual activity, which I'm beginning to probe in my own research in relation to the post-performance period of performing artists who come off of stage, and their descriptions that they are high or spent. Ultimately, this leads me to consider the possibilities of theorizing more around altered states of consciousness that may be induced by sound and song that are explicitly linked to the expense of corporeal action that mimics sexual labor and feelings of achieving orgasmic bliss and the afterglow. Now, let me turn my attention to examining some case studies of the various types of musical and sonic orgasm phenomena that exist. Now, unfortunately, I don't have the time to go into all of them in depth, but I'll do a detailed reading of at least one composition in its entirety, my first example, which is 5 minutes in length, and I'll be doing some running commentary over the audio for you. Now, almost all pieces of musical creation can be analyzed in various scientific ways. And as I've mentioned before, one of my interests is the spatial contour analysis, an example of which you see on your screen right now. Now, for each composer and composition is going to be a different graph, although of course we can start to classify recurring patterns and sequence techniques depending on the composer's subjective and complex ideation. And notice that what this diagram on your screen is depicting, it looked quite similar to the type of arc that was included between the two erotic faces in my first slide and in my flyer. And so I'm really fascinated by this idea of the sort of contour of the journey that the musician, the composer takes you on, and ultimately also the one who executes it. Now, in my case study one, I want to go to an example of the musical orgasm as design or form of the work. I'm going to stop sharing so that I can start to share my case study with you. And a formal structural approach in complexity, judgment, cognition, temporal spatiality, tone, color, palette, sequence techniques of the composer can all be captured in the type of graph that I've demonstrated to you on the previous slide. And think, for example, what this type of music, which I'm going to play to you, what its graph would look like. Would we be able to identify where the musical orgasm and the post-orgasmic refractory period would take place? Think about that while I share with you an etude by Rachmaninoff. Just want to make sure that I'm sharing the etude. I believe I am. And take a listen. So the piece starts with a lot of tension. It's in a minor key, uses a lot of chromatic scales. hear all that tension beneath the dominant strong melody at the top. In a very low smoky register also. So we had some type of climactic moment there, but was it the musical orgasm? Here we've come down somehow. And in fact, as you listen, you'll find the music is building again. Slowly but surely, we can feel there's an unresolved tension. And is it going to ultimately go towards release, or is it going to construct even further tension? Playing with the dynamics, quite soft, the texture's not as rich. We start to get indications of tension building up once more. There's your orgasmic bliss. And these are your post-orgasmic sort of quivers, spasms. And now we approach the release moment. And a modulation. We end in a major key instead of the starting minor key, and the pieces die down, signaling the release of the tension, which the composer is very skillfully and complexly treated in this composition. And that's the Rachmaninoff Etude Tableau number 5 in E flat minor, and it ends in E flat major. So the musical orgasm can be seen to be a macro design compositional technique. So think of what types of contours and arcs a graph depicting that type of music might look like. And yes, we would be able to most likely identify the moment of climax or the orgasmic pivot moment, where the release or refractory period can then also clearly be seen, and we can hear it clearly, some of us even more so because of our highly specialized ear. Now, the next two case studies will be an example of what I'm calling the multiple orgasm moment that is mirrored in musical composition. However, in order to understand this phenomenon in sonic treatment, I've got to take you back very quickly to the Renaissance era in Europe, where musical pornography was quite a feature of society. In a genre known as madrigals, European Renaissance composers and poets toyed with the concept of the musical orgasm in what has been termed the little death, or more formally in French, it's known as la petite mort. The expression is used to refer to what is known as post-orgasmic bliss, or the brief loss or weakening of consciousness, or the sensation of post-orgasm as likened to death. In other words, the little death is a climactic transcendental experience, and like joy, it's fleeting and impermanent. In musical settings, little death is captured sonically by composers using rapid contrapuntal lines or domino-like echo effects that overlap melodies one after another and blur harmonies. The result is that when singers utter the lyrics, they make use of rapid breathing, their successive deep gasps of air intertwined with a polyphony that is simultaneously coupled with the sexual innuendo contained within the prose. Together, these aesthetic features create the sonic illusion of the music mimicking the climax of the sexual orgasm at the same time that the composition reaches its formal climax. This generic treatment of music and text, too, is an example of what may be considered a musical orgasm, and an example of this textual and sonic type of treatment of the little death. And that's rapid domino-like echo effect can be heard in the madrigal Il Bianco Dolcecino by Johannes Akkerdeldt, where the last line, Di mille mort il serai di contento, is used to signify the moment of orgasmic bliss. Now I'm going to share my screen one more time and go to that. Madrigal Il Bianco. And I'm starting in the middle of this piece, so you can just hear the sort of domino-like echo effect towards the end of the piece on Di lille mort. And there you heard Di mille mort il serai di contento, with 1,000 deaths a day, I would be content. And of course, the poet is not referring to literal death, but the little death of the orgasm. That's why with 1,000 deaths a day, I would be content, the signal there to the multiple orgasms. I don't have time to go as in-depth in the analysis of the full poem to do the reading of the double entendre, but you're welcome to take a history of music course with me, and you might be exposed to more in-depth studies. Now, moving swiftly along, the Baroque composers who were considered masters of that stretto, that fugal style, the domino-like echo effect, borrowed the sonic treatment of the little death from the Renaissance composers, their predecessors, and they exploited this concept of signifying post-death euphoria in sacred works, mostly Christian biblical settings, where the resurrection, the ascension, or the transfiguration could be painted sonically with the use of these stretto contrapuntal fugal technique, which mimicked either arduous and anxious, almost mournful moments of transcendental rapture. And Johann Sebastian Bach achieved these skillfully in his numerous large-scale works for orchestra and choir, J.S. Bach, one of my favorite composers and who I've studied extensively, really just a genius composer. If you're not familiar with the music of J.S. Bach, please do yourself a favor and go and listen to that. But I'm going to share with you an example from one of his cantatas titled Wachet auf, ruft uns die Stimme. It's an Advent cantata. And in this work, scored for full orchestra and choir, the biblical story is narrated of the 10 virgins, perhaps bridesmaids or torchbearers for a procession, chosen to participate in a wedding. And each of the 10 virgins is carrying a lamp as they await the coming of the bridegroom, which they expected sometime during the night. Now, in this overture movement, which I'm going to play the extract from, which is a choral symphonic movement, Bach creates a vocal fugue on the word Alleluia. And he does this, in my opinion, as a prelude or innuendo to the coming of the bridegroom. And coming of the bridegroom here, I'm equating to a sexual coming or an orgasmic moment, in addition to the literal arrival. And that Bach sort of preludes the orgasm which will take place at the wedding night on the word Alleluia, when he creates this fugal stretto-like effect. Now take a listen to this section on the word Alleluia, where you again will hear the domino-like echo effect. And there you heard it on the word Alleluia. Bach creates that vocal, fugal, domino-like effect and the playing with the gasping of air. Hallelujah. And that sort of gasping and the overlapping, I equate as reading it as a musicologist, as Bach toying with a multiple orgasm idea, which is captured sonically. Now, for me personally, as a fugal fetishist, somebody who really loves this idea of the fugue and the playing with multiple melodies and domino-like effect or call and answer technique, this sort of musical movement induces an involuntary musical orgasm within me. And it's a deeply complex, multi-layered phenomenon that musicologists are only beginning to wrap their heads around, perhaps, in my opinion, because we've lost sight of the sexual and spiritual significance of the humanities and the human experience in academia. Nevertheless, I'm hoping that you would have been able to have identified it as I played it there for you. Now, moving along to my next case study, it looks at the complexity of musical creativity and the sonic capturing of the orgasm, this time with ejaculation. I'm going to stop sharing that screen and let you know that you can start to see that composers will toy with an ejaculatory moment related to the sexual orgasm, and we can identify that the orgasm might be either specifically male or female. And in this definitely female musical orgasm of my next case study, a character by the name of Isolde dies while having an orgasm to a vision of her deceased lover Tristan, and the opera ends that way. As you know, most operas, there's the tragic heroine dying at the end. In the opera Tristan and Isolde by Richard Wagner, in the movement known as the Liebestod, Isolde cries out, and this is a translation from the German, quote, "Do I alone hear this melody, which wonderfully and softly, lamenting delight, telling it all, mildly reconciling, sounds out of him, invades me, swings upwards, sweetly resonating, rings around me, sounding more clearly, wafting around me, are these waves of soft airs, are these billows of delightful fragrances, how they smell, how they sow around me, shall I breathe, shall I listen, shall I drink, immerse, sweetly in fragrances melt away, in the billowing torrent, in the resonating sound, in the wafting universe of the world breath, drown, be engulfed, unconscious, supreme delight. Now, Wagner demonstrates his mastery of the complexity of the musical orgasm and the broader Gesamtkunstwerk concept, a total work of art, considering that the opera starts very ambiguously, and we aren't quite sure what the starting note of this opera is, what its home key is. And this ambiguity is present for almost the entire opera, which goes on for 3.5 hours or more. And there isn't a moment of full harmonic resolution until the very end. We finally find the harmonic resolution that has been delayed for almost 4 hours throughout the opera, with an actual sexual climax, a female ejaculation, and death in an ecstatic state. Now take a listen to an extract from that aria from Tristan and Isolde, and see if you can identify a female orgasm compared to my next example, which will be an example of a male orgasm. Now we're going to go and find Tristan and Isolde. There you had a moment, the supreme moment of the climactic moment, the ejaculatory moment of that orgasm, as Isolde is having this orgasm to a vision which she's having in her mind. Now consider the following example, which I'm also classifying as an orgasm. It's going to be the male one this time. And this is from the opera Samson and Delilah by the French composer Camille Saint-Saëns. And you'll realize that this one, it's got quite a distinct male piercing like ejaculatory moment towards the end of this aria. It's a little bit of a minor duet towards the end of the aria, where she says to him, please respond to my touch. And he does respond ultimately through a very piercing cry. Take a listen to this. One of the most beautiful moments, in my opinion, really, of all operatic music, this aria, Mon cœur sera ta voix, and this is Delilah having seduced Samson. Again, that piercing, ecstatic cry I am interpreting in the reading of the opera and the compositional techniques which I'm unpacking in my scholarship, that their sensorial is signaling that is the orgasmic release for that character, Samson, in the moment of that aria. Now, in the second part of my talk, I'm nearly done. This is the second section where I'm now wanting to turn my attention to the musical orgasm or sonic orgasm more from the experiential perspective as a mode of embodied artistry and a pseudo-sexual supply for achieving states of bliss in performances. And of course, we've all experienced a state of bliss or been deeply moved by music, but for musicians and artists, the feeling of performing for others or creating one's own musical joy can become addictive or euphoric. But it's an often hidden and deeply personal, almost narcissistic experience that very few outside of the musical fraternity can understand or begin to comprehend. And it's perhaps worthwhile to mention that because musicians have both a musical identity and multiple identities in music, their relationship to song and sound is more complex than that of a consumer-only listener. And so consider the following example of what I'm also classifying as musical orgasm, what I'm calling the mental unison. So where you could have two or more musicians in perfectly synchronized altered states of consciousness. And notice the gesture, the movement, and the use of the body, the influence of the concept of artistic flow, sonic immersion, soulful alignment. We don't necessarily have the words to describe what's going to be happening in this next clip, which I'm going to be playing for you. But we can start to interrogate that we start to see here a manifestation of what I call homoerotic sonic phenomenon. And they display the cognitive hold that a musical identity has on the involuntary response system of some musicians as they are able to achieve a form of musical orgasm together on stage in front of an audience. And this is a piano duo, which I'm going to share with you, just a very brief clip. I don't find that clip for some reason. There we go. Watch the body language. So there, very briefly, I've illustrated for you what I call the depiction and embodiment of orgasmic musical joy. And here I draw on the nomenclature of joy to refer to a state of rapture, the transporting of one from the realm of three-dimensional reality to the higher dimensional realm where music lives. And in ancient Greek philosophy, the muses, and especially Euterpe, the muse of lyrical song, was referred to as, quote, the giver of delight. I liken this journey towards the transcendental realm, the altered state of consciousness, as the process of metaphysical ascension. The complex, embodied, yet simultaneously out of body musical orgasm is a deeply personal experience, as I've mentioned before. It's a subjective experience, although there are commonalities amongst experiences of musical orgasms. And like the sexual orgasm, the musical orgasm is the reaction to a type of stimulation, resulting in the feeling of a trance-like state that is coupled with physical, often involuntary spasms of the body. And for a very few, the orgasm mimics the sexual climax with or without involuntary ejaculation. And for some familiar with psychotropic substance use, they also liken the ecstatic state of musical joy to the euphoria that is sometimes associated with narcotic use, such as the high which is achieved from marijuana or LSD, for example. The experience of musical joy may also be deliberately induced for some consumers and creators who are recreational substance users, and they therefore delight in the altered state itself, which then itself also becomes addictive. In other words, the musical joy is the delight of being in alignment with one's craft, the heightened sensorial response, especially in relation to the professional achievement of the level of musicality, which is fully immersive and sort of displays one's having this out-of-body experience. And I liken the attainment of this state of being to a lifelong pilgrimage, which is arduous, filled with discipline and tension, and that these forms of musical orgasmic moments take on a worship which is offered up at the sacred altar of music. The return being, of course, the spiritual resolution of the tension which we as musicians carry in our mortal reality and via our artistic angst. Now, I'm going to go to a different clip this time. And this is going to be an example of an artist by the name of Shirley Bassey speaking in an interview about the sort of euphoria which they encounter. So have you ever seen a professional performer, a true artist who's come off of stage after a successful delivery of their craft? And you might have noticed that they have what I call the afterglow of the limelight. And there's a physical radiance, there's an aura about this performer after having come off of stage, which is visible. And most often it's the inability for them to stop smiling and the feeling as though they are floating. There's a feeling of being depleted, but delighted. This very specific euphoria has been catalyzed by the labor of crafting, the gift giving of the craft to the consumer, the audience, and the receiving of the recognition that one is magical as a musician, having induced musical orgasms potentially for others and perhaps even one's own. And take a look at this clip from a documentary on the life of Shirley Bassey, a famous diva from the second half of the 20th century, where she briefly alludes to this.
A little time. From Mr. Goldfinger, the man with the Midas touch. Really, Shirley?
Making people happy, seeing people stand up, which is the greatest thing in the world.
So she says it's better than sex. I just have to stop this, forgive me. Too many windows open now. All right, so this is my last 2 minutes of the talk as I come towards my close now. Now, I've spent a great deal of this talk focusing exclusively on musical persons and their relationship to the musical orgasm. And of course, one does not have to be a musician to experience a musical orgasm, as I've explained, and musical orgasms may also be experienced and achieved through deep listening and even through deep dancing. And the complexity of deep listening and deep dancing, it's another talk entirely on its own. But suffice to say that many people, especially religious and deeply spiritual people, are able to attain these altered states of consciousness induced by sound. Music and meditation, or music for relaxation, is another form of rapture, being moved from one state of being to another via the vehicle of sound. There's a measurable physiological and neurological response that can be seen when music accompanies states of being at ease or at rest. Now, scholars and scientists have described some of these types of involuntary reactions to music and sound as skin orgasms. I need to go to the PowerPoint and just make it a bit larger. Hopefully you can see that. Now the ASMR, the autonomous sensory meridian response, refers to autonomous, spontaneous, self-governing, with or without control, sensory, about the senses or sensation, meridian, signifying a peak, climax, or point of highest development, and response, referring to an experience triggered by something external or internal. So I say to you that because listening to recordings of these particular triggers mimicked, for example, if you're familiar with the ASMR modality, you go onto YouTube, you type in ASMR and you put headphones on, you'll find that what is going to be streamed back at you are people trying to relax you. And it's got various triggers like using fingernails on the microphone, tapping it, using hand rubbing, for example, various other things might be triggers, and this soothes the person's body, often inducing sleep. But because listening to some of these recordings, for some people, it triggered the sexual response cycle. For some listeners, they prefer to then enjoy achieving sexual climax via this new genre of ASMR, which became known as ASMR erotica. And it's taken hold on a certain portion of the public who've actively consumed this content to induce orgasmic bliss. Now, to close, I'll merely say that a musical or sonic orgasm or orgasmic joy, it's an ineffable but tangible state of being when we look at the artistry, and it's impermanent. And I consider joy to be a climactic sensation which signals to the self that one is peaking. It's an altered state of consciousness, which I liken to being sexually orgasmic. Joy, it's a mirror, it's a home within, it's a feeling at home in oneself. And joy is experienced in and through the body with the senses. So joy is not timeless, but temporal, fleeting, like a song that begins and ends, which is filled with tension, climax, and release. And joy is spiritual, and ascension and transfiguration of one's being, even for a brief moment in time. So my argument ultimately is to say that we are able to experience musical joy through the vehicle of the musical orgasm. And musical joy, it's a unique and complex creature, as I've tried to illustrate in my talk today. However, for those of us who are familiar with the musical orgasm likened to the little death, I will close by saying that with 1,000 deaths a day, I would die content. So thank you for your attention on this long talk, and I hope you've learned something interesting.
Glenn, thank you. Let me get myself back there. Wonderful. I mean, we could listen to you, I think, all day, and it's an absolute treat for a Friday morning. So just generally speaking, if you'd like to chat to Glenn or kind of engage with him, maybe just put up your hand or put your camera on so that it comes up on my screen. So then just alert me somehow. In the meantime, I'm going to just leap in and say I'm really happy that you like Bach, because if I ever thought of orgasm, it would have been one of Bach's Brandenburg concertos, just one little movement in it, and I'm afraid that's all I know. I'm not, without giving too much away. So I think it's something very personal, isn't it? Because it might not be the kind of music that would fit the pattern that you're talking about, you know, for other people, but I just have to say I'm going to listen to it again with much more attention.
Yes, please do. You'll find, Andrew, you know, that that Bach, not everybody understands Bach, because as I've said to some of my students also, unless you understand the Bach code, you're not really going to get the full meaning of Bach. And Bach uses a lot of code in his music. So if you've not been able to decipher it, you then just get the aesthetic of the sound. As if you know his name is in there somewhere, his name is in code, it takes on a whole new meaning, which itself also could induce a different type of relationship to the music. But I'm glad that you are a Bach fan as well.
Well, a fan of that, yeah, and I wouldn't say I know any code. I'm afraid I'm just, you know, an ignorant but aesthetic listener to Bach, and it was just intriguing to me that that was the one piece of music I've ever listened to that I thought, okay, if you had to describe a musical orgasm, not a musical orgasm, an actual orgasm, that would be the epitome of a kind of metaphor for that. But okay, so one of the things I was interested in, while we wait for hands to come up, is the visuals. I found it quite interesting that when you showed the kind of the visuals of Samson and Delilah, for instance, and some of the other visuals as also, I was cringing. Whereas when you're just listening to the music, there's there's something, as you say, I imagine personal, but there was something slightly uncomfortable about the visuals. I mean, it really, for me, detracted from the moment. Do you think you can put visuals and music together in a way?
Well, yes. You know, that's one of the things which Wagner was experimenting with, the Gesamtkunstwerk, the idea of the storyline, what you're receiving visually with the set design, with the costumes, with the actual artistry on stage also, and then the music, which is supporting all of this happening at the same time, which ultimately for Wagner came to dominate more so than the other components of his music. So I think, yes, the visual does detract. I would agree with you that because if you are more sonically inclined, especially for musicians, you'd find that even closing your eyes, I always tell my students, close your eyes, you'll hear the music deeper, you know. So it does affect one perception, but I'm also wondering whether we're not cringing because some of us could perhaps be not as familiar with what the storyline is to a particular piece of music or drama, and so in seeing it in the context of what is happening and realizing it is in fact a highly erotic scene, it takes on a new meaning. And I think we've really got a very strong Victorian inheritance of sexual conservatism, which is also influencing a lot of people's relationship to reading these things, or perhaps being uncomfortable with the visuals. I'm not saying that's the case for you, Andrea, but it may be that people prefer not to engage with the visual because it's too hypersexual.
Yes, and also I mean, they're beautiful voices, but not aesthetically beautiful. So you're thinking, she's not going to do it with that ugly guy. You know, so I'm sorry, there was that kind of disjunction of, oh no. Anyway, sorry,
It's make believe. Remember that now, Andrea. It's just a little storyline which is being acted out. I see Belinda's got her hand up.
Belinda, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, Glenn. Thank you very much for a very interesting conversation as always. Just to pick up on what Andrea just now said, I'm not a musician, so you know the kind of technical side of the music things, that to me that's magic. You know, I don't understand it in the way that you do. But as you've been talking, because I work in visual media, film, and you know, literature and all of that, I've been thinking, you know, constantly as you were talking about how this what you're talking about has been depicted in film, and how music has been used in film to, you know, convey that orgasmic experience. And I mean, so many examples, you know, come to mind, but one in you know, specifically popular film that I think is very familiar to everybody is that moment in Pretty Woman when Julia Roberts is in the opera, you know, watching La Traviata. And the old lady asks her after they leave their seats, ask her if she enjoyed it. And she says, I nearly peed my pants, you know, which is such a, you know, funny moment. But it, you know, her excitement, you know, her orgasmic experience of opera for the first time is, you know, contained in that. And of course, you know, that film is a remake or a rebooting of My Fair Lady. In My Fair Lady, you've got Audrey Hepburn, you know, saying, come on, Dover, move your bloody ass, you know, when she's, you know, at the horse race, which is, you know, a similar kind of, and of course, La Traviata, you know, the subtext of Traviata being, you know, being about, you know, sexuality and you know, all of that. So I mean, there are just so many examples in which that's used in film. I also think of something like the James Campion film, The Piano. You know, I mean that the entire film is a contemplation of exactly what you've just spoken about. So yeah, I'm going to stop because I can keep talking about examples as they come to mind. Oh, and just one other mention as well is, you know, the audience reaction when you think of, for example, the audience reaction of women, especially to Elvis Presley and to the Beatles. you know, that, you know, you only need to look at some of those, you know, old still photos, you know, and it captures exactly what you've spoken about. Thank you so very much.
Yes. Thanks, Belinda. That's some wonderful ideas there about how the orgasmic experience is mirrored again in sound with what's happening in film. And I often found it very difficult for myself to enjoy films for that very reason, because I'm more distracted by what's happening with the soundtrack happening in the background in relation to what's actually happening on the screen. So interesting that you're looking at it from the other perspective. Are there any other questions or comments?
You can also write comments in the chat, and we can look at them there as well.
If there aren't, I do have something else I can add quickly, just to extend this concept beyond just the classical domain, for example, because I see a lot of my students have joined this talk also. And an example of this very, very quickly comes to mind to me with the pop song Happy by Pharrell Williams. And the song literally is about happiness.
Sorry.
But if, go ahead.
Sorry, can I ask, how would you know if it's like that if it's not an orgasmic feeling, but more so like emotional feeling? How can you differentiate between that?
Okay, Ayana, that's a very excellent question. Let me address that and come back to the Pharrell Williams case study a bit later at the end. You will know. And the reason I say that is you will understand that the response, the physiological response which your body is starting to activate is not a common experience. So while you are encountering emotions continuously unrelated to music, you'll find that your emotions which you encounter in relation to music might mirror a lived experience. Whereas the musical orgasm, for those of us who are able to induce or to experience it, you'll find that there's also almost a sort of convulsing-like quality to the body. The body itself starts to move and sway without you doing anything. So that's what we call involuntary motion, you know, or you'll start to find that your eyes might roll back in your head. That, for me, the physiological markers make it distinct from just emotional, affectual response, which is sort of more rooted in our response system to other types of social triggers or personal triggers. The musical orgasm, remember, I've spoken about, even though it's rooted sometimes in a space of pain and sadness, also ultimately results in the feeling of ecstasy. So if ecstasy is not the emotion really being captured by what you're feeling, then you know that the chances are most likely that you would not be having one of these musical orgasms. But as I said in the beginning, you will know. I think most of us who have this experience knows that this is something phenomenal. It's almost like sex. It's better than sex. That's how you know.
I was asking because of when Belinda was talking about Pretty Woman, I saw that feeling and she was crying. So I was thinking, is that an emotional feeling then? Because seeing it for the first time and seeing the story behind the opera she was watching and everything, is it not an emotional feeling other than an orgasmic feeling?
Well, I think the orgasmic feeling is itself emotional, but they're also distinct. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
Thanks, Ayanda. I appreciate you engaging me.
Glenn, Gary has a question on the chat. Gary, do you want to come up and chat?
Hi, Glenn. Fantastic input. I really thought that very, very amazing. And just the complexity of music, how it gets to build that crescendo and that. But I was when you were showing that operatic piece, they flashed through the audience, and I saw an audience sitting there very formal and unemotional, and it just struck me as really odd that there's this orgasm happening on the stage, and the audience yet is, you know, and you know, just the link into Pretty Woman, this whole thing that we get you know, this pleasure by proxy kind of thing, you know, that that you can't do it yourself. So you go to a place that allows you to experience it, but by proxy, you know. Yeah, I was just struck by that.
That's very interesting, Gary, because I really like that concept, because the pleasure by proxy, it's a two-way street. You see, the performer also needs that audience there present for them to be able to have the pleasure of knowing my work is being received. Whether they are looking as dead as zombies sitting there, or they're actually engaged in having musical orgasms themselves, who knows? But I just didn't want us to lose sight of the fact that it's a reciprocal relationship in the theater house.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for that, Gary. Well, can I just say my last comment about the Happy song for the young people? If you go and take a listen to the song Happy by Pharrell Williams, and you watch that music video also, you'll find that that song will naturally uplift you. And if you've ever encountered that piece of music at a house party, if you've been drinking, or a bunch of folks start to sing along to the song or dance to the song, you'll find that there might be again a moment of a collective type of musical orgasm. The lyrics speaking about happiness, the major key uplifting beat of that song also, coupled with the relation which the people now have to what's happening to the music, that all starts to add to this idea of this tension which is being released socially. Just wanted to put that to them, but you can find it in other genres also.
Yes, and also potentially, Glenn, trance, the whole idea of that kind of inducing a trance-like state in through music and dance together. I think you are right that that's another seminar all in its own, and we've actually kind of slightly run over time, so I think that we should unfortunately end the but maybe we'll all go and listen to our Bach. I'm certainly going to. I just want to thank you very, very much for a very rich, intriguing, and a morning treat. It was wonderful.
Thanks, Andrea. I want to just thank all the people who've joined the meeting today also. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, and maybe I'll just put it on a gallery view so I can kind of see more people, and then yes, sign off, say goodbye, maybe put your video on so that we can see you, and yeah, have a wonderful,
and wave.
Yes, wave, have a wonderful musical weekend.
Thanks everybody for joining us. I hope you found it stimulating one way or another. Appreciate your attention.
Thanks, Glenn. Okay, bye.
Enjoy your weekend. Bye-bye.
Thanks.